Hello and welcome to Fight Talk, brought to you by the MMA Judgement. I'm Jay,
I'm Kieran.
and today we're joined by Chris from Unmatched MMA. Thanks for taking the time out, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
No problem.
So, first off, I just wanted to discuss like your setup. You're quite different to other podcasts. You know, it's basically like you have a podcast done in under 20 minutes, but you get everything across. Have have you always had you set up like that? Is that how you always wanted it, or is it just something that happened?
It just sort of happened. Like, I always planned on having a podcast and me being the only host of it because that's just how it worked out. But I expected the episodes to be a lot longer. My first episode, I had so much to cover because it was after the first Fight Island card.
Yeah,
And I was like, oh, this will be like 30, 45 minutes. I got so much stuff to talk about. And then it ended up being like 15 minutes. And it just sort of, no matter what I end up talking about, how much I end up talking about, it always hits that like 15-minute mark. And more people have started to notice it. So it seems to not be as much of a problem as I thought it was because I'm so used to podcasts being 3 to 4 hours long. But it it just sort of happened, and as long as I cover the bases and like I go over everything I'm supposed to go over, so I'm okay with it. And I think a large part of it is because I'm the only host. I don't have a co-host to bounce ideas off of. I just have the results. I have my opinions and my interpretations of the results, and then it's on to the next one.
yeah. I think it's really good, and if it works, don't fix it. As you say, you get it all done in like in 15 minutes, and you get that weekend's news and everything in that time. So I think it's great to keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
So I think I think it'd be a bit rude of us if we didn't start off with talking about obviously Anderson Silva's last fight coming up this weekend against Uriah Hall. It's going to be sad to see a legend bow out of the sport.
Yeah, I'm honestly kind of surprised that this is going to be his last fight too, because for the past year or so, he's been talking about he wants super fights. He's been calling out Conor McGregor, and he said he has two fights left on his contract, and he wanted to fight it out. But only having this one fight, and with it being no disrespect to Uriah Hall, but I didn't think that would be the type of opponent and the type of fight that Silva would want for his retirement.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is mad. It is mad seeing him going there. I know maybe like Dana spoke to him because it was like his recent losses and that. He said like, look, even though you've got two fights, just take the one because I think he recently said something about the sport not being the same since
Mm-hmm.
the Titas left. So maybe that also has something to do with it.
Yeah, that's true. I think the losses do have something to do with it because you gotta wonder at his age how much longer can he do it? How he has two fights and he wants to fight it out, but depending on how that first fight goes, how soon can he come back and what kind of shape is he going to be in by the time of that second fight? And I think just going into the X's and O's of this fight with Uriah Hall, I think it's a really dangerous fight for him because he's had some trouble with his legs lately, and Uriah Hall is such a powerful striker, and you gotta wonder if that's going to be a factor again with those kicks that Uriah Hall likes to throw.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be a factor. We mentioned it on our last episode. Anderson Silva hasn't really been the same since the two Weidman fights, especially the second one. And I don't know, it's been a shame to watch him get so many losses over the last few years. I think it's probably, although it is surprising, I do agree with you there. I think it's the right time for him to call it a day. Like you say, I think now there's almost sort of that next level of athlete in the UFC, especially at the moment, where I don't think, especially at his age, he can't keep up with them and compete properly anymore.
For sure. I think that was proven in his fight with Adesanya. He had a lot of good moments, but when you really look at that fight, it was like Silva versus Silva, and that new generation kind of it was the changing of the guard basically. And like you said, as bittersweet as it is to see him go, the way I see it, at least he's doing it on his own accord because you see some legends that they really don't know when to hang it up. And you can make the argument that he should have done it sooner, but in the Adesanya fight, he was still relatively competitive. So you gotta wonder if he's just waiting to get that one last win and go from there.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, whether he whether he was targeting a money fight with Conor, I don't think it's not what you come to expect from Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva wanted to fight the best because they were the best, not because of what he could do for his for his bank account. And it would have been I don't think it wouldn't have been something I would have wanted to see personally.
Yeah, it could always be worse. It could be like BJ Penn staying forever, and you have to tell him you gotta hang it up.
Yeah. Do you think all the losses over the last few years? Do you think that's done anything to affect Anderson's legacy?
It's it's hard to say because he made his UFC debut when he was 31, and that's when most fighters are hitting their prime.
Mm.
And he had such a successful title run until the Weidman fights, and after that leg injury in the second fight, you can make the argument that that could have been the point that he retired and his legacy would be completely fine. But with these losses, I keep thinking about the Adesanya loss because even Izzy was saying that was like one of the hardest fights he's been in. Obviously, this was before the Gastelum fight, but um, I don't know. I think his last win was against Derek Brunson, and like I thought that was a fluke. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but I still think because of the fact that he's still able to be competitive with these people in some degree, it doesn't affect his legacy that much because it's not like he's getting knocked out in the first round every single time.
Mm.
Yeah, see where you're coming from. But no, I think it is a shame that he's ducking out. Well, not ducking out. It's probably the wrong choice of words there, but
Yeah.
the fact that he's leaving is definitely a shame. I think, like you say, it's definitely a tough fight for him against Uriah Hall. Uriah Hall has seemed to have turned the corner with his career of late. Joining obviously the new team has been revolutionary for him. Really, you could say.
Mm-hmm. If and I'm sure you've seen this too. Silva's been saying that this whole fight week, oh, this is probably my last fight. First, it was this is definitely his last fight. Now it's probably, and obviously it's going to depend on the result. That's what I think he's thinking. So if he wins this and he wants to do that one last fight, who do you think his opponent should be?
Um,
It's a tough one, really. I think,
it is. It's a good
especially
question.
especially since recently he has fought sort of a who's who in middleweight. He's obviously fought Izzy. He's fought Cannonier recently.
Mm.
Obviously he fought Bisping before he retired. So I think he's almost done a sort of journey of the big players in middleweight at the moment. Obviously he's not anymore at that level where you could say a rematch with Izzy is on the cards, even though he probably did give Izzy more problems than anybody else has
Mm-hmm.
recently. When you can't really say that it's worth him fighting a Robert Whittaker. I mean, from my point of view, being obviously us from Liverpool, I think it'd be huge if Darren Till could fight him just for Darren Till. He's Darren Till's still an up and comer largely, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he'd give Anderson a good test. But I think Anderson would be competitive with him at the same time.
Do you, do you, there was obviously talks years ago, obviously when they were both in the prime and at the best. Do you think the fight to go out on, if he wins, would be JSP?
You know, I've thought about that a lot. I'm surprised that they never crossed paths before, but at this stage, if GSP's not going to come back to fight Khabib, I don't think he's going to come back to fight Silva. And I'm thinking about that Darren Till fight now. That would be awesome. Um, I think a good one would be Kelvin Gastelum because Gastelum's coming off of a couple losses and they've been booked to fight in the past before. And in the build up to the interim title fight with Gastelum and Adesanya, a big point that Gaslam was making was Adesanya couldn't even finish Silva. If I fought him, I'm sure it would have gone completely different and I would have finished him. Well, let's see it then.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would definitely be an interesting fight. You know, Gastelum, he's got dynamite in his fist when he can connect. So there's always the wow factor when he fights, and obviously Anderson's Anderson. So maybe. How do you see the fight going yourself personally?
With Hall,
Yeah,
um, it's so tough because I think at this stage in both of their careers, they're almost on the same playing field. Now, if it was Prime Silva versus Prime Hall, I'd pick Silva all day. But where they're at now, I think it really comes down to who hits harder and who's able to land first. And I think that favors Hall because of the frailty that Silva's had recently with the cannoneer leg injury and stuff like that. I think Hall could present some problems in the striking just because you got to wonder how smooth that head movement is from Silva, how fast he can evade those strikes, and I think Hall's going to be more powerful than him.
Yeah.
what the odds saying over in the US? Have they got Hall as the favourite, or is it still Anderson?
I haven't seen the odds
Have you
lately,
not?
but I think consensus everyone's rooting for Silva because of the narrative that's his retirement fight, but intelligently when people break down the fight, I think it's pretty even.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that Anson is going to have obviously talking about his whole leg injuries and everything. Being in his last fight, he got beat with leg kicks. Would obviously be that Uriah goes with that game plan. You know, rather than trying to hit him in the head and possibly bob and weaving, he takes out his legs.
And it's the same leg that's been getting injured too, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose that would end up being a factor in, you know, his decision if he does end up calling it quits. You know, at the weekend, if he's continually getting injuries on the same leg, then there's only so long he can physically go on, not just mentally.
Yeah, he could. I don't know if he's done this, but I know Diego Sanchez got stem cell treatment for a lot of his career long injuries, and he's been saying it's the best thing ever. He's never felt better. And maybe that could be a route for Silva to use if he hasn't already. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly something to consider, I suppose. Well, let's move on. Obviously, as I say, we're losing Anderson this weekend. Last week we lost Khabib,
Hmm.
or so it seems. Anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. But obviously, it now opens up the lightweight picture wide open, blows it wide open. We again something we discussed on our last episode. Where did he go from here? There's been a lot of ideas thrown about on Twitter. I'm sure you've seen the
Hmm.
majority of them yourself. What ideally, in your eyes, where do you think they go with the lightweight division?
Man, it's such a stacked division, and the top five is just killer's row. And now with Michael Chandler in the equation, and with how much the UFC's been pushing him, it's hard to gauge what they want to do because I think what I want to do with the division doesn't align well with what the UFC wants to do or what I think they're going to do. But if I was in charge, I would probably see if Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor weren't tied with each other already and like people are talking about them fighting, I would break that up and make Ferguson versus Poirier and McGregor and Gaethje. Which one would be for the title? I don't know. Probably Poirier and Ferguson, and then the winner of Conor and Gaethje fights for the belt. But it's such a you would think it would open the division up with Khabib gone, but now there's so many potential matchups, and it's hard to pick which ones to make.
Do you think, well, two things, do you think McGregor actually deserves to be in that picture, regardless of whether he's the money maker or not? And the second thing is, do you think Oliveira is being overlooked and not getting given the shot that he deserves?
As a McGregor fan, it's hard to say, but I honestly don't think he deserves to be immediately in the title picture. I don't think that they should have tried making the rematch with Khabib and the Ultimate Fighter and everything when he was just coming off a win against Cowboy at 170 nonetheless.
Yeah,
And I honestly thought before the pandemic started, I thought the lightweight division was in such a perfect place. They could have made Khabib Ferguson. That fight finally would have happened. However that goes, we'll never know. But while that's happening, they could have made McGregor and Gaethje for International Fight Week, and then that would have set up the winner of that fight. But then with the pandemic and everything, and then they made as soon as they announced Ferguson versus Gaethje, I'm like, okay, everything's messed up now. This is going to take so long for this division to shake out now. The fight was always Khabib Tony, and everyone was clamoring for all accepting. So when I think about the other contenders in the division, I'm a huge Tony Ferguson fan too. So I don't think Conor deserves to get the jump ahead of Ferguson when Ferguson's just coming off of one loss and there's a bunch of circumstances that led to that loss. You can argue that he would have lost with more time to prepare, but we'll never know. And Conor hasn't fought at 155 in 3 years, maybe 4 years now. So yeah, he needs to take a fight at lightweight, and then if he wins, maybe fight for the title after that. But I don't know. And about Charles Oliveira, I definitely feel like he's being overlooked. I think he deserves to be in that picture way more than Michael Chandler does. He's his win streak is absolutely incredible. He's really slick on the ground and his striking's gotten better and better. And when you throw him into the top 5 against Poirier against Ferguson, I think that'd be some really exciting matchups. And I can see him fighting for the belt in the next with the logjam at lightweight, probably 2 years.
yeah.
Yeah.
I really
So
think, you know,
you've kind of already answered the question I was going to ask, but obviously Michael Chandler is it looks like the UFC are going ahead with him anyway.
Mm,
Do you think it's a wise move them trying to include him so much at the minute with him not
no.
having a fight in the UFC?
I think he needs to fight someone like Paul Felder. Maybe I'm a big fan of the matchup with him and Ally Quinta. I haven't seen a lot of people talking about that lately, but I think that'd be an amazing test to see where he fits in the division. And stylistically, they match up really well together. I don't think just because he was a Bellator champion, I think we'd both agree that there are levels between the UFC and Bellator, and
Definitely.
I don't think the fact that he was a champion in Bellator makes the case for him to just make his UFC debut in a number one contenders fight or a title fight because especially when you consider the top 5 in the UFC and all that they've done, all that some of them have done to earn a title shot like Ferguson, like Oliveira, like Poirier to get another shot at the title. It he needs to fight Iaquinta. I think that's the fight all day.
a lot of people seem to be wanting to match him with Hooker. Like, how do you think that one goes?
Chandler versus Hooker.
Yeah,
Hmm. I think Hooker would win it just by keeping the range. If he doesn't put himself into a dogfight like he did against Dustin Poirier or Edson Barboza, I think I think he's got it. And I don't know. I think Chandler would present some challenges, but not enough to actually get the jump over Hooker. I think Hooker's too he's too sophisticated, he's too elusive when he wants to be, and with him training with Volkanovski and Adesanya and all those people, the dude can game plan, and I don't think Chandler's going to be able to do anything that Hooker hasn't seen before just with those two training partners in mind.
yeah.
Yeah. Sticking with lightweight and Khabib for the moment. It did come out last night that Dana thinks he'll go for 30-0 after having more conversations with him.
Hmm.
Do you think that's something we'll end up seeing?
I hope so. I mean, I wouldn't consider myself a Khabib fan, but obviously his dominance in the octagon, you can't help but respect it. I admire his family values, and I think he carries himself as a true champion. And I do think it would all of us, including him, would probably feel incomplete in a way if he didn't try and go for that 30th victory, because for the longest time that was the narrative, that was his plan with his father to get to 30 and 0. And I can understand why he was so emotional after the Gaethje fight and wanting to retire, and the promise he made to his mom. I can't argue with that, but I think there needs to be a 30th fight.
Do you think Dana's wanting to actually make the Ferguson fight? Because I know Ferguson posted like a video almost. It was like of him and Khabib. It was after Khabib won, weren't it? So you think Dana wants to get that out for the fans and see if he gets to 30 now? Fans actually finally get that fight.
Bro, I hope so. I I love Tony Ferguson. Like, Conor McGregor got me into the UFC, but I stayed interested because of Tony Ferguson.
Yeah,
And I believe in my heart of hearts that he is the single biggest challenge for Khabib, both on the ground and just all together when you consider conditioning, striking, grappling. I think if anybody can beat him, it's him. And for the fact that that fight hasn't been booked, well, hasn't happened now after being booked 5 times, it's heartbreaking. Like,
yeah,
Definitely.
that's the fight all day, every day. I was so upset when they did the build up to Khabib and Gaethje. They're like, "Oh, this is the biggest challenge for Khabib." Blah blah blah. I'm like, no, he Gaethje reminded me of Connor and Dustin so much. Just the same approach, the same game plan, and you saw what happened with them when they went in with that game plan.
yeah.
Tony's not gonna do that, and I think to see Tony's talking about taking Khabib down. He was talking about at the press conference, he put his belt on the ground to measure how he was going to take Khabib down and stuff like that. He was measuring how he was going to kick him in the head. Like, that's the fight. And I do think that that's the best fight to end Khabib's career on. I know that they're talking about GSP. No, I'm not about that life.
Yeah.
And I think that would be super interesting to see them be the coaches on the Ultimate Fighter too. I'm way more into that than I am with the McGregor rematch.
Yeah, I mean, for me, if he rematches McGregor, I mean, Khabib has nothing to gain from fighting Conor McGregor again except
No.
a huge check in the bank.
Yeah.
And Khabib isn't really about that. He just wants to fight again, kind of
Hmm.
similar to Anderson Silva. He wants to fight the best because they're deserving of the chance. And you know, he's been respectful with Gaethje after the fight. He was very respectful with Dustin
Hmm.
after their fight. So I think, yeah, I mean, Ferguson is it's the one fight, it's the big what if in the lightweight division, and I think we all deserve to see that fight eventually. And if he
It
does come
needs an
back for
answer.
30, yeah, it does. And if he does come back to try and get 30 and 0, then if he gets it with Ferguson, then I think there's no real argument anymore then about GOAT status. I don't think.
Hmm. He even said so many times, with all the times that that fight's been booked, he said, "If I want to be cemented as the greatest lightweight ever, I have to beat Tony Ferguson." And I don't think that just because Tony's coming off of the loss that he's on right now, I still don't think that changes because, again, when you consider the factors that went into that loss and the short notice and everything, Tony's still dangerous. And I think, if anything, that loss showed Tony some holes in his game that he maybe wasn't aware of, or he was taking them for granted because he was able to tough it out. And I think he's going to be even more dangerous coming off of this loss. And with Khabib, his last 2 performances, especially against Poirier and Gaethje, he's never looked better. And I truly believe that if they make the fight now, we would get the best out of both of them.
Yeah, it would be an amazing fight. So obviously with Khabib getting the win over Gaethje, he went to pound for pound number one, which has resulted in John Jones being, for lack of a better term, a salty bitch on
Yeah.
Twitter.
Hmm.
um, do you think he's got a right to be a bit salty and pissed off with that decision?
Not at all. I definitely believe that John Jones is the GOAT. I mean, with his resume compared to Khabib's resume, I don't think they're really comparable. But I think a lot of people confuse the GOAT and pound for pound. They kind of mix them together. If we're just talking pound for pound, it's Khabib. It's Khabib. It's probably been Khabib for a while now, and their performances. John Jones's last two fights, he's looked human. Khabib hasn't. He faced some adversity in the Dustin Poirier fight, but even then, that was like 30 seconds out of a 15-minute contest. It's really not that much to point at when John Jones, you can argue that Dominic Reyes beat him. You can make the case that Thiago Santos beat him. I would argue that if you look back at that fight, it's more clear that John Jones won it, but still, that was a factor. So, just going pound for pound right now, it's definitely Khabib. John Jones has no room to argue that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're right again. I think people do confuse the GOAT with pound for pound. Pound for pound is obviously more in the moment what's going on. Some of the rankings on there are a bit strange for me. I don't think, at the moment at least, I don't think Adesanya is below Jones. With the performances Adesanya's been putting in recently, I think he's above Jones right now.
Mm.
But obviously Jones, moving up to heavyweight and stuff like that, it's a new chapter for him. It's a chance to cement his legacy even further and even stronger than it already is. How do you see him faring at heavyweight?
It all depends on the opponent. I was a big advocate for him staying at light heavyweight, consistently cleaning out the division, just doing what the champion's supposed to do, not chasing the big fights, the money fights, because if you don't focus on your contenders in your division, you're gonna get caught. And I think that happened in the Dominic Reyes fight. He said in the build-up he was campaigning for a Stipe Miocic fight, and Dominic Reyes almost beat him. So if he moves up to heavyweight, I think it depends on the opponent. I know a lot of people are into the Francis Ngannou fight. I'm really not. I think it can go one of two ways. Neither of them really do anything for me or for the division, really, when you think about it. Um, I'm really interested in the Stipe fight because they're around the same height, they have the same reach, they walk around the same weight, so it's a pretty even playing field. And with Ngannou, it could look like the first Stipe fight and John Jones just wrestles him for 25 minutes. Everyone's going to be like, oh, I don't want to see that. Or Ngannou knocks him out cold in 15 seconds. And then what do you gain from that, though? The division doesn't really move because John Jones will be making his debut. I think it depends on the opponent. You hear stories about John Jones training with heavyweights like Overeem and Arlovsky in their primes, and he ragdolls them. I don't know. I don't know if he could do the same thing against someone like Curtis Blades or someone like Derek Lewis. Well, maybe Derek Lewis, but Curtis Blades with the pressure he puts on you, you gotta wonder what John Jones is gonna look like from his back. So it really depends on the opponent when he moves up.
But, who do you think should be his opponent, considering his last two fights and that they are questionable? And obviously he's vacated the title and he's moving up. Do you think he still gets a top five, or?
I definitely think, given his resume and just his status, he deserves a top five for sure. With the fact he was a former champion and he he might have cleared out the division once or twice, but as far as the title picture goes, you give Francis a title shot, see how that fight plays out. Maybe you could put him up against the winner, but looking at the rankings, I think, yeah, I don't know. I think maybe while Francis is fighting Stipe, you can make him versus Curtis Blades, assuming Curtis Blades beats Derek Lewis.
Mm.
So the winner of that fight, while that's going on, that could be the number one contenders fight. Or John Jones can just sit and wait for the next title shot after Francis and Stipe plays out.
Yeah, I think he'd be better trying to get a win in heavyweight before he targets the title fight. I think it'd be unfair to the people who have, worked hard in heavyweight for a long time to get to near the title fight, and obviously we know Ngannou's next in line.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, maybe, yeah, maybe goes after a Blades or a Derek Lewis or someone, gets a win, gets the feel of heavyweight, and then moves on to the title fight. Because it looks like they're going to be adamant to get him in that picture sooner rather than later, and for obvious reasons. Like I say, John Jones was one of the greatest combat fighters we've ever seen,
Yeah.
so he's obviously going to be in that picture regardless. But I think he needs to just see how he fares in heavyweight soon first.
And you gotta wonder how soon he wants to make his debut because after the Adesanya fight, he went on that Twitter tirade and he mentioned he's taking all this time off to gain muscle and so he's not so outweighed by the heavyweights. So you gotta wonder how long that's gonna take and how that lines up with the title fight because he could make his debut right in line to fight the winner of the title. So it also depends on when he wants to come back, as well as how the fights play out. I think they go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, like Keaton said, he's obviously vacated the belt, and Jan is now the champion. Obviously, there's been talk on Twitter of Adesanya targeting Jan, and Jan's apparently up for the fight. How do you see that one going if it eventually happens?
If it happens, I mean, I think if we go off of consistency, I would have to go with Izzy because you kind of know what you're going to get with him. Jan is such a wild card. He could have the performance that he had against Dominic Reyes, or he could have the performance that he had against Jacare. I don't know if you guys remember that fight. Sometimes I forget that fight happened, but it was really lackluster. And I thought Jacare beat him just off of pressure points and grappling exchanges and stuff like that. So if Izzy does move up to 205, it's going to be interesting to see how he looks, but I still think he has it. He's got the speed advantage over Jan. I think Jan's legendary Polish power would be interesting to see if he can land on Izzy, but yeah, I would favor Izzy in that fight, probably by decision.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Obviously, it's a different dynamic with Jan and Jones. In Jones, you had the danger of the wrestling and that, and I don't think Jan would do that. He'd obviously stand up and try and use that power to knock him out. But I just think even moving up, I think Adesanya would be too slick and too fluid for him. Yeah, I agree. I think Izzy would win that fight. I think maybe Jan's just looking for any opponent because I mean Santos and Teixeira's had a few delays, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Izzy's also been sort of targeting Jones himself.
Hmm.
Um, do you think that's a do you think that's a smart decision from Adesanya? Do you think he's wise to be going after John Jones?
I don't think he should be going after Jones at heavyweight, but I think if they make it at 205, it'd be really interesting. Um, Going back to Jan versus Izzy, whether or not it should happen, I think is you can make a case as to why it should and why it shouldn't. I personally don't think it should because I think Thiago Santos, if he gets by Teixeira, he needs to get that title shot. And
Mm.
I'm gonna go off on a limb and say he's gonna be the champion by this time next year. I seriously think that there's nobody that's gonna beat him. And other than John Jones without legs. But while that fight's going, I think it depends on when they book that fight, Jan versus Izzy, because I don't know how many people are interested in seeing a rematch with Robert Whitaker. And depending on how Santos versus Teixeira goes, it could be a while before that title fight could be booked. So if they book it soon because Izzy loves to stay active, he could fight like every week if he wanted to. Um, and Jan is he likes to stay active too. So if they book that soon while Santos is recovering and something else happens in the middleweight division, it would be interesting. But I don't know. And John Jones, I think at 205 is the more interesting matchup. At heavyweight, I think it's I think it gives John Jones a really big advantage over Izzy, and it's almost not fair. And that fight should be made at 205. Izzy shouldn't be chasing him to heavyweight.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, you mentioned with with Stipe and Jones, the of similar height, they walk around about the same weight.
Hmm.
Do you think because of that we will actually see a better version of Jones because he won't have to be cutting so much weight as he normally will be?
It's hard to tell because when you're in a fight camp, a lot of the weight just kind of comes off with the training and then the diet and stuff like that. And Jones has been really open about the weight cuts aren't really that hard for him. Now, whether that's just a facade and it is difficult for him, I don't know. He seems sincere when he talks about, oh, the weight just comes off. So, without the weight cut, I don't know how big of a factor it'll play, if at all. But I do think it could give him more of a just a physical strength advantage when it comes to wrestling if he chooses to wrestle because it depends on the opponent because the way Jones fights, he likes to beat you at your own game. He stood and banged with Santos for 25 minutes and completely obliterated his legs. He stood with Reyes until he learned that he probably shouldn't and then went for the takedown. So he hasn't really played to his strengths until it's in a rematch and I don't know how much of the weight cut would play into it just because I think that favors the grappling and the wrestling more, and I don't think he would be using that.
Yeah, no, good take on it. It's yeah, and then I think obviously Kieran has mentioned there to me, which I actually didn't know about before we went live about Robbie Lawler pulling out of his fight,
Mm, yeah.
um, which is a shame. I mean, I say I didn't see anything about it beforehand. So do we know the reason for that at the minute?
I I tried figuring it out. All the sources I've looked at it just says he's not fighting because of an injury. They don't say what it is, but you gotta wonder how bad it is because Robbie Lawler, he's not normally one to back out of a fight. Injured or not, he still shows up to fight.
Yeah, so obviously that leaves Mike Perry without an opponent. He did, I believe he asked for Kamaev, but obviously he's booked with Edwards. So who would you actually put Perry up against?
Well, I just saw this morning. Bilal Muhammad had a fight booked, and then his opponent got injured. So now he's looking for a replacement, and he called out Mike Perry.
Right.
I think that'd be an interesting fight.
Yeah,
Off the top of my head, who else is like available? Definitely not Chimaev. That especially now that Chimaev's booked against Edwards, it just doesn't make sense anymore. I think Bilal Muhammad would be the fight to make.
yeah, I think that's a good matchup. Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, while we're mentioning Kamaev and Edwards, it's nice to see Edwards finally getting back into the octagon after
Yeah.
what feels like an eternity. Um, I don't know. For me, obviously Edwards was ranked number 3, I think, wasn't he? And
Hmm.
obviously Kamaev, even though he's fought a lot recently, he's still unranked.
Mm.
I think it's I see Edwards winning, but it's a risky fight, fighting an unranked opponent like that.
Mm. I think if you would have asked me a few months ago what I thought about this matchup, I would have said the same thing. It doesn't make sense. Chimaev's not even ranked. Edwards is on his way to a title shot. But honestly, with the way it is now and Edwards just almost refusing to take a fight, especially with Wonder Boy, like why would you not take that fight?
Yeah,
Like I think he was almost strong armed into taking this fight too, because the UFC removed him from the rankings and then put him back in when it was announced that he accepted to fight Chimaev. So if only they could have done that for the Wonder Boy fight. But yeah, I definitely agree that this is a dangerous fight, especially with the fact that Chimaev he's a training partner for Alexander Gustafsson. He fights at 185 and 170, and just in his 3 UFC fights, nobody's been able to exploit any of his weaknesses because his fights don't last that long. They don't get out of the first round. And he could do the same thing to Edwards too. He could just ground and pound him all night. He could just knock him out standing. I don't think this is the fight for Edwards, but he had to take a fight at some point. So at this rate, I don't care who the opponent is, just get him in there.
yeah.
So do you see Edwards not winning the fight then?
Right now, I think it's a little too early to tell because it's been a year and a half or close to it since Edwards' last fight, and that was against RDA, and he did look really well in that. But at the same time, you got to consider the type of opponent because RDA just hasn't seemed that motivated lately. Um, Chimaev, he's on top of the world right now, and he's gonna be bringing that with him into the octagon. All that hype, all that intensity. You gotta wonder how Edwards is gonna be able to deal with that because if something we haven't really seen Edwards ever since the fight with Usman. We haven't seen him in that much adversity, and Chimaev is going to be the one to put some on him. And I at this point I don't know how he's going to be able to deal with that, being on that win streak that he was on, being so close to a title shot. I think right now I think Chimaev has a chance, but I can't make a pick right now. It's still too early.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think Kamaev will be very motivated going into the fight. I think he's going to be very confident going into the fight. Obviously, with him fighting so often recently,
Mm,
I think I don't know. In my heart, sort of tells me that Edwards' sort of skill set and just overall, like we know he's top five easy in the
mm.
division. So you'd like to think that that will come into it and he will get the win over him and just gets him. It just gets him in there again, like you say. He needed someone to. He needed something to get him back in, and at least then he can. Then if he wins, he can go on and try and get towards the belt again. Because he was obviously pushing towards that beforehand.
Yeah, and it the reason it's hard for me to pick who's going to win is because sometimes the better fighter doesn't always get their hand raised, and it comes down sometimes to just physical strength, like the Mike Perry and the Mickey Gall fight, for example. That people were expecting Mickey Gall to present some challenges on the ground. He couldn't even get it to the ground because Mike Perry was just so much stronger than him. And I think Chimaev just physically is stronger than Leon Edwards, and I don't know how much of Edwards' skill set is going to be able to give him more of an advantage over just that raw physical strength.
Do you still think Edwards is targeting the Masvidal fight at some point?
I hope it happens. I would like some closure on that because right now I feel like that's his biggest claim to fame is getting three-pieced and assaulted by Masvidal backstage. Because if you really think about it, a lot of people don't even remember that RDA fight happened. So
Mm, yeah,
it's it's hard to tell because I would be chasing that too. If somebody slapped me around like that behind with cameras around backstage, I would want to go after that guy too. So I hope that fight happens, but you got to wonder with Colby and Masvidal and Gilbert Burns, and all of them have cases for a title shot. You got to the division does have to shake out, and Edwards has to get through Chimaev.
Yeah, I think. Would you rather see Kobe fight Masvidal, or if Edwards is to beat Kamaev, have him fight Masvidal? Who would you rather see him have?
That's a good question. I think Masvidal and Covington is the fight to make right now because
Mm.
they are actively talking about making that fight, and I don't think Edwards, even if he beats Chimaev, I don't think he's going to be ready to to come back so soon against one of them. So, and there's a lot of drama with Masvidal and Covington too. Maybe not as much with the whole Leon Edwards stuff, but there's still a story there,
Yeah,
and it's an intriguing matchup because they lived with each other, so they know each other's games. So I think Masvidal Covington would be the more interesting fight for me.
yeah.
yeah. Do you think Masvidal is sort of? It seems to me like he only kind of wants money fights now. He obviously took the Usman fight at really short notice. But for me, it seems he's become a star outside of MMA now.
Hmm.
And I think for me, it seems like he just wants that. to be the money fight, and now like a bit of a Nate Diaz. Obviously, the fight with Conor made Nate Diaz a money fight, and I think obviously the BMF title the concept of it was a bit of a joke, but it turned
Yeah.
out to be a good fight in fairness. Um, so I think I don't know if it's difficult for me to say with Masvidal. I think on a full camp, I think he does better against Usman, but like you say, the fight with Colby is very interesting at the minute.
Yeah, I definitely agree that that star power is definitely getting to him, all that spotlight and everything, and that in turn is going to make him ask for more money and chasing the bigger names instead of actually playing with the division and the rankings and what makes sense. Because if Usman wasn't the champion right now, I don't think he would have gone for that fight. He would have probably gone for the Covington fight because there's drama there, and he's got a whole loyal fan base that thinks he could beat Covington, and that would bring more attention, more pay per view buys, stuff like that. And it's kind of a shame because I think that's why the Edwards and Masvidal fight hasn't been made right now, because that could have happened International Fight Week last year, right after that whole three-piece in Minnesota. But then Ben Askren started chirping. He's a bigger name, so they made that fight. Then he just became an even bigger star, and Leon Edwards is just sort of existing. And yeah, I think he's definitely chasing the money fights more so than the competition.
Yeah. Obviously, you mentioned you were a big Conor McGregor fan, so I think it'd be rude not to ask you how you think his fight with Dustin's gonna go. Do you see any outcome where Conor doesn't get his hand raised there?
Definitely. I think this fight's going to be a lot more competitive than their first fight. But I think Poirier has advanced so much more since the first fight than McGregor has, but McGregor has still made improvements. He's made changes to his game. Uh, it's kind of hard to notice them because of how inactive he is, but it's still there. You can see it in his training, in his workouts, all the subtleties. Just going to the way he holds his hands up. He never did that when he was at featherweight and stuff like that, and it brings up a whole different mindset to his opponent because they're so prepared for something, and then with one subtle shift, it completely changes. Like like if you look at the Cowboy fight, I don't think anybody was expecting Connor to throw a head kick and have it actually land. But if you look at that replay, he was I don't know how to explain this. He moved his hips and his shoulders in a way that it looked like he was about to throw a cross or a hook or something like that. But with that flexibility and with that rotation, he came with the leg and aimed for the temple. And you could see Cowboy was defending the punch, and that opened his head right up. So with those types of improvements, I don't know how. I don't know if it'll change the outcome. I think Connor still gets his hand raised, but Dustin's. It's going to be a dogfight. I can't wait for it, man. Like I part of me wishes the fight wasn't happening just to clear up the title picture a little bit, but because as a fan, if I'm not taking the title into consideration, I seriously can't wait for this fight because I think Dustin has a much better chance of winning because you got to wonder how much better Connor's cardio and his endurance is. And you saw with Dustin after that hip surgery that he had last year, he's able to throw kicks now, and he dug so many good kicks to the body of Dan Hooker. If he does that against Conor McGregor, it's going to be a long night for Conor, and I can see him getting finished.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be one to look out for when it does hopefully happen. I think at the minute for me, I think Connor's waiting for crowds to come back.
Hmm.
Obviously, everybody knows that he feeds off the crowd. He loves the energy that he gets from the responses and stuff like that. So I can understand why he'd want to wait for them to come back. But when it does go down, the whole world will be watching.
And to kind of go off that, obviously it's been quite a joy to obviously the impact of like punches and kicks and then the whole the commentary and the teams, giving
Hmm.
advice. But are you ready to see fans back now? Like even if it's only a little bit.
I think if I've actually attended UFC events before, I would probably be like, oh, I can't wait till they can let crowds back in so I can go to one. But as a fan and now doing this podcast and doing even more analysis than I thought I did before, I love being able to hear the corners much more clearly. If the fighters are talking to each other, you can hear it better.
Yeah,
And like I'm always listening for that anyway. Back when there were crowds before I was doing this show, I just always found it interesting. That's why I loved that series on Fight Pass, The Thrill and the Agony, and they had all that behind the scenes stuff and what they were saying in the octagon with each other. But um I think I almost think the product itself, watching a UFC fight, is better with no fans because you still have the commentators. I mean, John Anik. John Anik is the goat, and with him still on the mic with those fights going on, I'm perfectly happy. You can actually hear the punches land. So if someone swings really wildly and it looks like it landed or did something, there's a chance it was blocked or they just barely missed. Now you can really tell because you can hear it. Obviously, that kind of broke my heart with the Ferguson Gaethje fight, but it was still something really cool to witness. And just, I think the experience is better without fans too because you get better post fight interviews from the fighters because they don't have that energy from the crowd, whether it's good or bad. You don't have them cheering them for calling out a name that doesn't make sense. You don't have them being booed from maybe a lackluster performance and then they just start saying stupid things. They actually, from the time that they get out of the octagon to the station where they have to put the headset on and everything, they have time to compose themselves, clear their heads, and actually think about what they're about to say. And I think it's just better in this new environment than it was before the pandemic.
Do you think we'll see fans be more appreciative of certain fighters and fights in general when they are allowed back? Because obviously, it's that you don't know what you've lost until it's gone. It's kind of almost that. I think for me, I think that you're going to get less booing if it's you hear it all the time. If it's a fight that's predominantly on the crowd,
Mm-hmm.
the crowd's booing. I think you'll probably still get it, but I don't think it's going to be as much when fans come back, just because they know now it can be kind of taken away from them at any point.
I certainly hope so because I never understood booing someone after they just fought their heart out for 15 or 25 minutes. That's never been my thing and just I hope that the with the pandemic and everything, there's been even more UFC fans coming out of the woodwork because there's no other sports on and this is the only sport I care about, so I'm going to say this is still the only sport on. And with all those eyes paying attention to these fights now, I hope that with this fanless environment and they can hear the punches land, I hope it gives them more of a technical respect as to what these fighters are doing. And hopefully, these casuals and maybe even these hardcore fans in general just won't say, oh, stand them up, jujitsu sucks, and all this other stuff. Like, they'll actually know what they're looking at and have more of an appreciation for it instead of just saying what they say.
Yeah, no, that's our up to.
yeah,
We're completely against the booing of any fighter for when if they fought the heart out, like you say, for 15 or 25 minutes, and then to boo them is just it's completely disrespectful to what they've gone through for months to get ready for that fight and then putting on a show. So I hope they are more appreciative myself.
You remember Iaquinta versus Masvidal and what happened when the fans booed him?
I can't remember that, to be honest.
Oh man. So it was a split decision, and Iaquinta got his hand raised. And I think this was actually Masvidal's last fight at lightweight. Everyone thought that Masvidal did enough to win the fight, and Iaquinta's just looking into the crowd. He's like, "You guys booing me?" And he was like flipping people off. He's like, "I just fought my ass off," and all this other stuff. Oh my god! Definitely go check that out on YouTube. It's
Oh
awesome.
yeah, definitely, definitely.
yeah.
First, going to one that we touched on, Edwards versus Chimaev. What do you guys think about that being a 5 round fight?
I don't know. I think it's hard because obviously with Jemayev, we haven't, he hasn't really gone that long. We haven't seen a lot of him, so if Edwards does take him to like the distance or into like them later rounds, like how is he going to be? You know, it's it is a different dynamic, and it'd be intriguing to see. Maybe that might be Edwards' plan, is to drag him out into them further rounds and try to take him out there. But yeah, I like it to be a 5 round fight. Yeah,
Yeah, I think if Edwards can get him out of that first round, it's going to be interesting to see. We might have another, we might have a Shane Carwin scenario on our hands where get him out of the first round and that's all he's got. It
Hmm.
could well work out in his favour, but conversely, I suppose you could say it could not. It could just make Kamaev even more dangerous because he's got so much more time to work with and cause damage. So I think that's what Edwards needs to do, though. I think he needs to survive that first round and take him try and get him into the championship rounds. And I think if he can do that, I think it's Edwards' fight.
Do you see the fight going past the third round?
Um, at the moment, no, I don't. I do think it's going to be there's going to be a stoppage somewhere. I think if it's in the first round, then it's going to. I think it'll be Kamaev. I think Edwards has got to really show his how smart of a fighter he actually is in this fight. I don't think he can just kind of go in all guns blazing against them. He's got to be, he's got to wait. He's got to be patient. He's got to bide his time and pick his spots. And if he can fight smartly like that, then whether he can finish him remains to be seen. But I think that's the way he's got to go about that fight.
yeah, I agree. I think even though it would be intriguing to see it go into them championship rounds and that, I don't think it gets past the third. I think I mean, we don't know what Kamaev's cardio's like, and maybe he surprises Edwards and is still fresh come that second round, and I think it'll be intriguing to see. But right now, I think I'm rooting for Kamaev. Well, I think he wins anyway.
Mm. And the reason I bring that up is because, like you said, Chimaev hasn't even gone a full 5 minutes in the octagon, so why put him in a 5 round fight? And it just makes me think about all the other fights that could be made that should be 5 rounders. And the one that comes to mind off the top of my head is Zabit and Yair Rodriguez. I think that needs to be a 5 round fight all day, every day. If it's a 3 round fight, you're doing the fighters and the fans a disservice.